Hello, my name is Bruno Glaser and I'm professor of soil biogeochemistry at the Martin Luther University of Halle in Germany. I am dealing with biochar research for about 23 years now. Today I will summarize the state of the art of biochar research. I will start with a brief summary on biochar properties. Then I will explain the difference between fake news and real facts. For this, I will use the fancy tool meta-analyses, which is a quantitative evaluation of existing reliable research results. After explaining how meta-analysis works and how it will be carried out, I will summarize existing scientific results of biochar effects on plant growth, carbon and element dynamics, and soil hydrological properties. Finally, I will summarize biochar results on most important ecological processes. Biochar is intentionally produced by thermochemical processes in order to improve soil properties and ecosystem functions. There are a few assay expressions similarly used, but being different from biochar. First of all, charcoal is physicochemically identical to biochar, but its use is primarily energy production. Black carbon means polycondensed aromatic carbon. A part of biochar is composed of black carbon, but not all biochar is black carbon because biochar contains also some kind of non-condensed aromatic carbon. Pyrogenic carbon means fire-derived carbon. All biochar is of course fire-derived and thus pyrogenic carbon, but not all pyrogenic carbon is biochar because also pyrogenic carbon derives from natural fires which do not intentionally produce biochar. When we look at the structure of biochar, specific properties can be translated into ecosystem functions. For instance, the porous structure of biochar is responsible for water storage. Condensed aromatic moieties are stable to degradation and therefore contribute to long-term carbon storage or carbon sequestration. Functional groups at the edges of biochar produced during biotic or abiotic biochar oxidation are responsible for nutrient storage, especially cations such as potassium, calcium, or magnesium. Remnants of labile organic compounds can be readily degraded by soil microorganisms, and ash is an immediate fertilizer. However, when using biochar, it should not be looked at it as a single compound. Rather, its multi-purpose use is called biochar systems. The highest practical benefit can be obtained using as many as possible options, such as sustainable use of agricultural residues for energy production or cascade use, such as food additive ending up in the soil in order to enhance soil fertility and thus crop production, and a part of the crops ends up again as residues for biochar production. However, it is clear that we should not grow forests or cultivate biomass in order to produce as much biochar as possible. Instead, a sustainable feedstock needs to be non-competitive and nitrogen poor because a lot of nitrogen is lost during thermochemical conversion, thus we end up with woody biomass or being high in lignin content. It should be easily procurable, of course, and it should of course be poor in contaminants such as heavy metals and chlorine. Organic contaminants are converted to biochar during the process. Examples for such sustainable feedstock is alien invasive plants, sawmill residues, coffee husks, flower residues, animal residues, and sewage sludge. Meanwhile, there exists a wealth of public opinion about biochar, most of it without proper scientific evaluation. The problem with that is that politicians and stakeholders are mostly using these non-scientific publications for decision making. Most of it does not reflect state-of-the-art scientific knowledge. Therefore, I call it fake news. A few examples of such statements: up to now, no significant effect at agricultural scale observed. Up to now, no scientific proof for positive ecological effects. Based on lack of scientific proof, no broad-scale application recommended. Potential positive effects cannot be compensated by mentioned negative effects. Climate-smart argument could be misused to produce large amounts of biochar without further ecological effects. And now let's talk about how we can distinguish fake news from real knowledge. Of course, nobody is free of bias or error, but the most reliable database of peer-reviewed scientific knowledge is called Easy Web of Science. If we look there for biochar as a title, we can find around 6,100 individual peer-reviewed scientific studies until mid of September 2019. Of course, it is impossible to read all of them if you are a biochar newcomer and you want to get a representative overview on that topic. What you can do is to read compiled reviews, which reduces the number of available articles to 228. Reviews are qualitative compilations of available literature and scientific results, but the problem with this approach is that reviews reflect the subjective opinion of the authors, and the selection of individual articles is more or less arbitrary. At least it's not transparent, and the chosen approach is qualitative. A more representative and quantitative approach is the so-called meta-analysis. Meanwhile, there are 34 meta-analyses on biochar, and before I summarize all available meta-analysis on biochar, I will explain in detail what this is and how does it work. A meta-analysis is a quantitative approach for systematically combining results of previous research to arrive at conclusions about the available body of research. Quantitative means we use numbers for that. We can make calculations and get new numbers. Systematic means we use a transparent approach with approved methods. Combining means we're putting together existing results, and previous research means we use what is already done with respect to scientific investigations, and conclusions means we can generate new knowledge out of this. And now let's discuss in detail how a meta-analysis is carried out. In a meta-analysis, all available results to a specific topics are compiled. For instance, here as an example, we use the effect of biochar on plant availability of phosphorus in soil. Then we can calculate a mean response ratio, which is abbreviated as RR here. And this is a simple division with an effect in a treatment with biochar divided by the same treatment without biochar. We can also calculate a confidence interval, which is kind of an error by the given formula. And the corresponding graphs with the results are called forest plots, and they are really easy to understand. So the red line here at 1 corresponds to no effect. That means this ratio is 1. The effect is the same with biochar and without biochar. If the number is bigger, then we have a higher or a positive, in most cases, biochar effect. If the number is lower than 1, we have a negative or a smaller biochar effect. If the error bar here overlaps 1, we have, in this example, a positive effect, but which is not significant. And here we have significant and positive effects, or significantly positive effects in all cases. We can also differentiate different properties, such as biochar feedstock in this case, but you can also use soil properties, soil types, climatic regions, and so on. This is also an advantage of the meta-analysis. Another advantage of meta-analysis is that this approach does not matter which soil or extraction method was used, because within one study this is leveled out by the responses ratio calculation. In addition, it allows a generalization because normally a wide range of ecological properties is covered. But as I told you, we can also differentiate again ecological effects, feedstock, and so on. We could also weigh data or individual studies, but I do not recommend it because field data are more important than pod studies, and the pod studies are easy to conduct, so the number of replicates is normally higher in pod and laboratory studies than in field studies, which would then be overestimated compared to field data. And now let's talk about the results. This is most probably the most detailed meta-analysis on the biochar effects on plant growth. And on this slide, we can see that biochar has both negative and positive effects on plant growth. However, most of the studies showed positive effects with a grand mean of about 10%, and only a few studies showed negative effects. Therefore, the risk of using biochar is only minor. Surprisingly, biochar promotes also tree growth, and this tree growth enhancement is independent from climatic regions. Obviously, hardwood benefits better than conifers from biochar, and this positive effect on tree growth is obviously independent on the duration of the experiment, or in other words, it is a long-term effect which lasts at least longer than 1 year. Biochar promotes also root growth, which is shown here, but it does not change the root to shoot ratio, and we have seen in the previous slides that biochar promotes also above ground biomass, so this is no contradiction. While biochar does not significantly change the uptake of nitrogen to the roots, obviously the uptake of phosphorus is promoted by the addition of biochar. Here we can see that biochar promotes the soil microbial growth as indicated by soil microbial carbon and nitrogen in the soil, as shown on the left-hand side of this slide, but it does obviously not influence the microbial activity as indicated, for instance, by the substrate-induced respiration or the metabolic ratio as shown on the right-hand side of this graph. Here is the evaluation of the biochar effect on soil microbial community structure, and we can see only hardly any influence. Only biochar produced at lower temperatures, smaller than 350 degrees, promotes soil fungi, but this is the case only in soils with low soil organic matter content. In all other cases, there is no influence neither on the fungal to bacterial ratio nor on the ratio between gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria. In this slide, it can be clearly seen that biochar decomposition is only very small. We have here the total biochar, cumulative biochar decomposition as a function of time. These are days, so it's 1 year to 9 years. And we can clearly see that over a period of 9 years, only 4% of initial biochar has been degraded. On the right-hand side, we see that biochar decomposition strongly decreases with increasing residence time in the soil, and that means that the wealth of short-term biochar incubation studies strongly overestimate biochar degradation. When we look at the carbon dynamics of biochar, it seems that there is an increased carbon dioxide release, especially when fertilized with synthetic nitrogen. On the other hand, there is a clear increased soil carbon storage or a carbon sequestration potential. Altogether, the carbon sequestration potential of biochar is much higher than its slightly increased carbon dioxide release, so that biochar helps to mitigate climate change by compensating carbon dioxide release into the atmosphere. This meta-analysis again shows an increase in soil microbial biomass upon biochar addition, as has been shown by one of the previous meta-analyses. So it's a corporation. of this fact. With respect to greenhouse gas emissions, as already mentioned, there is a slight increase of carbon dioxide emission, especially when unfertilized, but this is overcompensated by the huge carbon sequestration upon biochar addition, as shown in the previous slide. Methane emissions seems to be not influenced by biochar, while nitrous oxide emissions are lower when biochar is applied to soil. In addition, nitrous oxide emissions decrease with increasing amount of biochar addition to soil, which is impressively shown in this meta-analysis of Cayuela in 2014. With respect to soil nitrogen transformations, we can see that biochar reduced the uptake of plant nitrogen. There is no effect on ammonia volatilization. Again, here there is a reduction of nitrous oxide emission, the higher the amount of biochar added. And, which is very important with respect to groundwater protection, biochar obviously reduced significantly nitrate leaching, and also this effect is higher the more biochar was added. Here is a graph on the plant pay availability. Biochar significantly improved plant pay availability in soil, and again here this effect is higher the more biochar was added. With respect to the element uptake of biochar, the picture is more diverse. It seems that biochar can reduce the uptake of some heavy metals into plants. For instance, the uptake of nickel is reduced, which is shown here. The uptake of cadmium is reduced, and the uptake of chromium is reduced, while the other elements such as arsenic, manganese, zinc, there seems to be no influence. So biochar can be used to reduce the uptake of some heavy metals into plants. And the last point I want to stress is the effect of biochar on soil hydrological properties. We can clearly see that biochar significantly reduced soil bulk density, thus increasing soil porosity, independent of biochar size, feedstock, and production temperature. And this effect is higher the more biochar is applied. And of course, this is positive for increasing soil porosity, and with that, biochar significantly improved the holding capacity for plant available soil water, which is shown on the right hand side, and again here this effect is higher the more biochar is applied. So let me summarize. Meanwhile, we have a clear picture on material properties of biochar and its physicochemical interactions with soil, green and blue, and we can see that most effects are positive. So, for instance, long-term carbon storage, I have shown effects on nutrient runoff, such as nitrate. We have enhanced water holding capacity. Less is known on the biochar effects on biological interactions, especially with plants, animals, and humans. The only negative effect which we could observe is a reduction of albedo effect. And this is clear because if the soil gets darker, then it absorbs more heat. And this is the case for all fertile soils, by the way. Therefore, from a scientific point of view, the risks of using biochar as a soil amendment are only minor. Furthermore, it is ridiculous that biochar is a legal ingredient in human and animal food, and it can be legally used in organic food production, but not in conventional agriculture up to now, at least not in Europe. Further studies should focus on biological interactions of biochar rather than repeating what was already done.